Hello gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain, and today I'm going to be reviewing and talking about Rifts. Now, I've done a lot of retro board game reviews on my channel, but this is going to be my very first retro RPG review. Now, this is relevant because this game is more than 20 years old and for the most part really has not changed at all since its inception. This is the Rifts Ultimate Edition, which was an update they did a number of years back, but really it was really just rules clarifications. It's still the same system it was all the way back since 1990 when Rifts first came out. Now, this review, because it is still in print, because Rifts is still for sale, is really going to be for people who have never played Rifts, who have heard of it and want to know, should I try it now? Is it worth it to try it now? So if you are one of those people who is a big fan of Rifts and has been playing it way back since the 1990s and has never stopped and still plays it now and doesn't need me to tell them whether or not they should play it, this review is not for you. And if you are a huge fan of Rifts and can't stand to hear someone talk about some negatives of the game system, then this is really not for you. Please turn this video off now. And the reason is, I'm going to have to talk about some negatives when talking about whether or not new people should get into Rifts now. Now, I have a whole lot of Rifts books out here. This is everything I think I currently own in the Rifts old school system. I've been collecting Rifts books forever, since there were Rifts books. I'm also wearing an old school Rifts sweatshirt here, which I bought one year at the Palladium open house because I at one point was such a big fan of Palladium books that I even went to one of their Palladium open houses, and I've been playing Palladium books in Palladium Books' games in one form or another since the 1990s. So I don't want to hear from anyone who's a super fan of Rifts that I'm just a hater when I have to talk about some negatives. You have been warned. I will be talking about negatives, but I am someone who has spent tons of money on Palladium books. Rifts in the year 1990 when it first came out was actually the first role-playing game book I ever bought. It was not the first one I played, but it was the first one I purchased myself. And the thing that drew me in was the artwork and was the world. But what I'm mainly going to be talking about is the game system. Also, another disclaimer, there is a lot of controversy that has gone on around the designer, Kevin Simita, who is also the owner of the company Palladium Books, who publishes Rifts, and a lot of controversy about Palladium Books themselves. I am not going to be talking about any of that here. That is not relevant to my review of the game system. Whew. Now that all that is out of the way, if you're still here, you're interested in hearing my review, and if you're going to throw in some, you're just a hater and you don't understand the awesomeness that is Rifts in comments down below, just be aware I'm going to ignore you. So, here we have it. Now, for those of you who don't know, and for those of you that are still here, Rifts is an everything and the kitchen sink kind of universe. It is what Kevin Simita himself is often referred to as a post-apocalyptic world where hundreds of years ago the apocalypse happened. The apocalypse was caused, and this is going to be just a crash course in the world, if you will, but the apocalypse was caused by a limited nuclear exchange in South America that happened on like a solstice when the planets were in alignment, and the nuclear bomb went off on an intersection of ley lines, and it caused like the breaking of a dam, the floodgates of magic to come back into the world, which caused earthquakes, tidal waves, hurricanes. Atlantis rose from the oceans, though really it actually came back into existence from being held in a pocket dimension. Volcanoes erupted, and holes ripped open to tons of other dimensions, and many creatures from those other dimensions came in. Some of them were just the people of those other dimensions, but some of the dimensions that holes open to could loosely be described as hells. And demons and monsters and undead creatures came through from those other dimensions. Mexico was taken over by vampires, as an example. Demons rampaged the former United States. Atlantis, which came back and is ruled over by these demonic gods known as Splugorth. and all sorts of things happen, and there is no end to the kind of stories you can tell and the kind of creatures you can come in contact with on Rift's Earth. It has been hundreds of years since that cataclysm. Things have stabilized a bit, but things are still kind of hellish. There are monsters and supernatural creatures everywhere. There's also the remnants of super advanced technology left over from our society, as well as other super advanced technologies brought in through the rifts from other societies. You are one of the people in this post-apocalyptic world going around and adventuring on Rift's Earth. You can also go through rifts, which they themselves still open up, and you can wind up having adventures in the multiverse, going to other worlds, which I have run many games where that happens. Now, the world, or rather, not even universe, but multiverse of rifts is the best part. The story holds up. The universe, the multiverse holds up. This is really, really cool. This is one of the things, along with the artwork, because the artwork on the covers of Rift's books, as well as inside, they are black and white books, very much like the old school role-playing games of the time period when they came out, from the late 80s into early 90s. That were, most of the books were usually black and white, and they are that, but the artwork holds up. I do really like it. And the color artwork for their book covers have always been awesome. That is definitely good. Now, the rule system. We need to talk a little bit about Palladium Books' rule system. See, here's the thing. Palladium Books came up with an idea that they should do a single rule system and have it be basically the same across all of their games. There are minor adjustments for the settings of each individual game they come out with, but generally speaking, if you know Palladium Books' rule system, you can play any of their games. It's roughly the same. And that rule system, with minor changes that have gone on through the years, basically goes all the way back to about 1983, when Palladium Books was first coming out with their Palladium system, with older games like Palladium Fantasy Role-Playing Game System, which was essentially their generic fantasy game and their kind of version of Dungeons and Dragons, which is fitting because their rule system was heavily influenced by advanced D&D. Now, the system changed a little bit from then into 1990, but hasn't really changed much since. And the main change that happened between the system as it existed in the mid to late 80s to Rifts, which came out in 1990, was the inclusion of something called mega damage. Now, this is something that many people, you will hear people talk about on the internet, but the basic idea is that mega damage, when you're talking about a weapon and the mega damage that it does, as well as mega damage capacity when you're talking about armor, vehicles, or even incredibly tough alien monsters, is roughly equivalent to 1 mega damage being 100 regular damage, or SDC, standard damage capacity. So whereas a normal pistol will do normal standard damage, a big laser gun, or even a little laser pistol, will do mega damage, which means a normal person, which only needs standard damage to kill them, being shot by a laser pistol without any armor on, will be vaporized, will be completely wiped out in one hit. And that is the one thing that was added onto this system, the Palladium system, from the previous games in it. Now, the basics of the Palladium system are this. It is a level-based system. You go up levels. You choose a character class, just like a lot of the old school games of the 1980s. And you gain experience that is awarded to you for your actions in the game. Better role-playing and better successes will give you more experience that's dealt out by your game master. And as you go up levels, each level will give you access to new skills, as all of your existing skills also go up levels. The skill system in this is a percentile-based system, meaning you roll two 10-sided dice. You have one, which is going to be the tens place, and the other is going to be the ones place, which allows you to reach numbers anywhere between 1 and 100. If you roll 2 zeros, that's 100, because it's the only number between 1 and 100 where both the tens place and the ones place would be a 0. And if you roll like a 1-0, that's a 10. If you roll a 0-1, that's a 1. And of course, any number between 1 and 100 is possible when using two 10-sided dice, which of course have numbers 0 through 9. Now, you want to roll your current percentage or less. So a lot of skills, like when you pick a class, you might have a skill that starts out at, say, 65% and gains 5% every level, or 3% every level. So you go up a level, you gain your 3%. It goes from 65 to 68. When you're rolling to try to succeed at a skill, you want to get a 68 or less. Anything more than a 68 will be a failure in that skill. Now, your game master can alter the number based on difficulty. Let's say you're picking a lock, and your current skill is 68. But let's say you have expertly made lock-picking tools, where you can be like, well, Game Master, I have expertly made lock-picking tools. What'll that give me? And the Game Master says, I'll give you 10% off that. So that means you go from a 68 to a 78. But now let's say you're trying to pick the lock while your teammates are having a firefight with evil robots in the hallway that you're in. Well, now you're distracted and there's blasts happening around you. He's like, well, I'm going to give you the 10% for the master tools, but I'm going to take off 15% for how distracting all the shots around you are. So, it's a give and take in that regard for that system. Now, we now come to my first gripe. And it's not about the system of the percentile rolls. That's fine. It actually works fairly well. It's the fact that this game actually has two completely different systems, which was not that uncommon in the 1980s, but nowadays, usually skills and combat are all with the same sort of system with most role-playing games. This is kind of a throwback to a time where you had multiple systems in games a lot of time. Now, the system for combat is a D20 type system. It's very similar to a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons combat systems in that you roll a 20-sided die and you either have to beat a certain difficulty rating to hit a target at range, or you have to beat a parry score if you're hitting a target in melee. Now, both of these systems are fine. You often, as you gain levels, depending on what sort of type of combat you choose, you will often gain bonuses to hit certain skills in certain kinds of weapons, which will give you bonuses to hit with those sorts of weapons. But the problem is that the two systems are not similar at all. You've got a percentile-based system where you're trying to roll equal to or less than a number, and then you have a D20-based system with bonuses and penalties to it for combat that is totally different, where you're trying to roll equal to or greater than another number. Now, is this a real problem functionally in the game? Not necessarily. It just seems like the two systems are not all that compatible. It feels a little scattered to people who play modern games. Another problem in this system is that when you choose a character class, you usually get an option of a couple of combat skills to choose. Usually, most character classes either come with hand-to-hand basic or hand-to-hand expert, and then allow you to sacrifice a number of other skills you could take to upgrade that to something like hand-to-hand martial arts, hand-to-hand commando, or even hand-to-hand assassin. And the thing is, these systems are very different from one another. And there are even some characters who start with no hand-to-hand combat skill, which is terrible. And the combat system in this, unlike the percentage-based skill system, which I don't really have a complaint about, except for the fact that it doesn't mesh well with the combat system. The combat system in this, I do have a complaint with. And that is that the way combat works, the number of attacks you get can be highly varied. If you have no combat skill, you get one action during a full round of combat. Whereas if you start with hand-to-hand basic, you start with 4 attack or actions during the round. Whereas if you start with hand-to-hand expert, you start with 4, but you gain additional actions very quickly as you go up. And even more quickly if you start with hand-to-hand commando. You can get quite a few actions very, very quickly, to the point where you have 7, 8, 9, even 10 actions per round. And what happens is, very quickly, the way these actions work is everyone takes an action around the table in initiative order. And then everyone takes an action again, but if you run out of actions, you stop taking actions. So there gets to be a point where if you had hand-to-hand basic, and for a long time you've only got like 4, maybe 5 actions, you hit that mark, and then you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs while the people with commando take their 6th, and their 7th, and their 8th action, and just keep going. And it doesn't make any sense, because when the round is over, which is only supposed to be a few seconds, suddenly you have all your actions back again. And you're like, oh yeah, I get to take my actions. And you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs again. And it's not very fun, and it's not very flavorful. For a long time, I was heavily house ruling this to change this system, because when using the system as written, it became incredibly tedious for people who did not want to make combat heavy characters when they were in combats. But if I didn't put in enough combats, it felt like I wasn't allowing the people who made combat heavy characters to use their characters to their full potential. So this is a system that was, in my opinion, and this is the first part of it that I really have to say, is a system that was better left in the 80s. This really should have been updated at some time between 1990 and now. And it does not. This system does not hold up to today. Now, the character classes. Something else, I got to go back to the character classes, and I have to talk about this. The character classes in this, there are many of them. As you go on through the books, there are character classes in almost every book on this table. And there's a lot of books on this table. I've actually read all of these over the years. The character classes are incredibly structured. They tell you specifically, you come with this skill, this skill, this skill, this skill, at this amount and gains this many percentage points per level. And then you have a couple of skills you can choose. Oh, and then pick two of your choice. Now, if you're picking a highly disciplined military character class, like let's say your character was, for some reason, a coalition soldier. Well, you went to boot camp. Yes, you should learn specific skills. But if you're being a character that is like a mercenary soldier, just someone who decided to be a mercenary, or a headhunter, or a juicer, or even a glitter boy, who is someone who found an ancient power armor suit, or it had it passed down through the generations, and you go out there like a knight in shining armor rescuing the downtrodden. Well, you didn't go to school to be a glitter boy. There's no set group of skills that you definitely should have. The classes are way too restrictive for what they're supposed to be storyline-wise. And that is something that always bothered me with this. So that's another big gripe I have with this. Many modern systems have done away with levels and character classes completely. I don't think there's anything wrong with having character classes, but some of these should be a lot more freeform than they are, and definitely feel really dated in that regard. Now, this was a game system I played for a very long time, and I was very well versed in it. I game mastered multiple campaigns that went on for multiple years in this system, and all the way up into the 2000s, and really up until even into, I think, into the 2010s, I was still playing games of this system. But there got to be a point where game mechanics for role-playing games had really taken some giant leaps forward in the 2000s and in the 2010s. You got to remember, unlike board games that have been around for thousands of years, role-playing games really didn't exist until the late 1970s. They haven't had as long to evolve, and they were really in a much more primitive form all the way up into and through the 90s. It's really only in the mid to late 90s that they started to become much more streamlined and much more smooth, and really have taken a lot of leaps and bounds in their advancements in mechanics in the 2000s and the 2010s. So it was when I discovered the game that really made me stop playing Rifts was Savage Worlds. So I got into Savage Worlds, and I was like, wow, this is so much smoother, so much easier to use as a game master, so much less labor intensive. And labor intensive is a big keyword for Rifts when you're game mastering. All of the monsters, all of the creatures, all of the aliens in this, all of them, they don't have like a version in the books that say, okay, these are the average stats for this race. These are the average stats for this species. They all say, oh, well, its strength is 3d6. So there are none that are able to be played right out of the book. You actually have to roll up characters of all of them. It's incredibly labor intensive. I have had many times where I spent more time preparing for a game of Rifts than we actually spent playing the game of Rifts. And I have binders full of NPCs that I would save because I could just rename them and use them again later, and I didn't want to have to go through making all those NPCs, but I did spend hours and hours doing that. In addition to that gripe, there's another one I have that I just thought of, which is a problem with the fact that this book, and this is definitely another symptom of games from the 80s and early 90s, this book is not fully playable for the Rifts world without getting some of these expansions. There are no just monsters in here. When they talk about all the different monsters in the Rifts, there's none of them in the Rifts Ultimate Edition to just play out of the book. You got to get some of the other books to play them. And for player characters, they talk about all the different dimensional beings, or DBs as they're called, as the slang for creatures that came from the other dimensions. But in this book, you can play humans, you can play dog boys, which are genetically engineered anthropomorphic dogs that were created by the Coalition, whether you're playing ones that were raised in the Coalition or freeborn dog boys whose parents escaped kind of like through an underground railroad system. Or you can play dragon hatchlings, or which are basically like young or baby dragons that have, are what they sound like, you're actually a dragon. Or you can play Psy-Stalkers, and that's basically it. Psy-Stalkers are mutant humans that have psychic abilities and hunt down supernatural creatures. None of the regular DBs, because even dragon hatchlings are not known as DBs, they're known as magical creatures, I think, which are a little bit different than DBs. None of the DBs are actually in here. You need to go into some of the other books or create them yourself. This is not a fully playable world out of the main book, which is something that also is very much behind the times. Most games now will be a fully playable book right out of the main book, and then the extra books are, icing on the cake. They're extra stuff, but they're not necessary. This one, you really can't play with the main book. You got to get the main book and at least one or two other books to fully flesh out a part of the world to be able to play there. Yeah, so this is it's not unplayable. You can play this game if you've played this game in the past and want to play it to reminisce about it, to get all nostalgic about it. It's fine for that. If you still play it and have no trouble with it, if you are a big fan of Palladium books and love Rifts and have an ongoing Rifts group and you have no problems with it and you have tons of paperwork that you've been making characters and monsters for years and is no longer as labor intensive for you, yeah, it's fine for you. You are the people I would recommend this game to. However, if you're a new gamer that has never played Rifts, never played a Palladium system, would I recommend this game to you? The answer is no. I would not. If you are a gamer who's getting into role-playing games, this is not a user-friendly system. This is a very labor-intensive system, and I would not recommend anyone who's not tried it to try it now. It is terribly outdated. Now, if you want to play in the Rift system, they did come out with Pinnacle Entertainment released Rifts books in the Savage World system. Now, if you play modern role-playing games, and you're into modern role-playing games, and you want to play in the amazingly interesting Rifts universe, because the universe itself, the multiverse, is still really interesting, I recommend you play those. You check out the Savage Worlds edition of Rifts. I've played a whole campaign in that, and I find it very well done for the modern game system. It is the way to experience Rifts today. I do not recommend playing the old Palladium Rifts game. Now, this is a game that if you had asked me back in the early 90s, I would have rated this very highly. And for that time, that would have been fine. The problem is, it's gone steeply downhill as they have never properly updated the rules, never properly done a real new edition. This whole Ultimate Edition is really just rules clarifications from the original edition. It's really the same edition. It was left behind, and that's the problem. So its score for me has steadily gone down. Once upon a time, it would have been very high. Now, I'm forced to give Rifts 4 out of 10 stars. And the reason is, 4 means it's not very good, but I could play it again. Now, the reason it's a 4 and not worse is because the game is still playable. And if at a convention, if some people wanted to reminisce, I'm the kind of person, I've never sold my Rifts books. I have always kept my Rifts books for nostalgia reasons. I could see myself playing one-off games of it for nostalgia reasons, but I would never play a campaign of this again. I would never run a campaign of this again because it's too labor intensive. And I wanted to play in the Rifts world, or I wanted to run a game in the Rifts world on a long-term basis, I would use the Savage Worlds edition of Rifts. So 4 out of 10 stars means it's not very good, but I could play it again. And in this case, for one-off games. But let's get a second opinion, because second opinions do matter. Now, Lynn has played multiple multi-year games of Rifts with multiple different characters, so she has had a lot of experience with this as well. And I do know, spoiler, that she feels very similar to me on the fact that this score has gone down, though I do not know how many points she's going to give it. So let's find out. Lynn, how many stars out of 10 would you give to Rifts?
5.
All right, so Lynn is a little bit higher than me. Now, I gave it 4. 4 is not very good, but I could be convinced to play it again. 5 is, it's just meh. So she hasn't gone down quite as far as I have, but some of that may be due to the fact that she never game mastered it and doesn't have the game master's perspective of how labor intensive this game system is, especially compared to the modern, much more user-friendly games. She only played it as a player, which in that case, you write up your character and you get going and you have fun. And any game, regardless of system, with a good game master can still be fun. So there you have it. So it's 4 stars from me, 5 stars from Lynn. I don't recommend this game to new players. Again, if you used to play Rifts and you want to get nostalgic with it, go right ahead and rock on, because you know what? Anything that you enjoy, don't let people tell you not to enjoy it. So if you're already enjoying it, it's still for you. But if you haven't tried it and you're into newer styles of games, it may not be for you, and I can't recommend it to you if you have never played it before. But there you have it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns on the game of Rifts, feel free to put them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this review and you'd like to see me do more role-playing game reviews like it, be sure to give this video a like, share on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Kaptain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.